So what's going to happen is you're going to have almost like an exodus of all these individuals that are in Canada on work permits who are going to have to leave, or they can't stay in the country with work permits at least.
Today on True Patriot Love, I have Nir Rozenberg, a friend of the show, back to talk about LMIAs. So Nir, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah. So you and I had an offline conversation about LMIAs about 2 weeks ago, and I left and my jaw dropped. And, I asked you the question. I said, what was the LMIA program supposed to do, and how far did the system go adrift? So let's start with the first question. LMIAs, for people out there who are not familiar with the LMIA system, what was it put in place to do, and when kind of approximately was the program started, and what did the government really want it to achieve?
Yeah, so first of all, I think the program began well before my time being an immigration consultant. I've been doing this for about 20 years. It's been around for a lot longer than that. There's a department in Canada called Employment Skills Development, ESDC, Employment Skills Development Canada. And what they do is a part of their there's a division in there for temporary foreign workers. So what they do is they assess essentially the labor market. So prior to when I became an immigration consultant, this used to be called a labor market opinion. Employers would submit an application. It used to be a 2-page application, very simple, explaining what they're looking for, why they can't fill a particular a position, and there were no advertising requirements. It was fairly simple to do. You basically explain what you're looking for, why you need to fill a position, that you can't find a local Canadian citizen or permanent resident to fill the job, or there are specific skills that you're missing, and you're identifying a foreign worker to fill the position. And you're requesting ESDC to assess the labor market to determine whether that position is going to be a positive, neutral, or negative effect by filling it with a foreign national, whether that's going to be a positive, neutral, or negative effect to the Canadian labor market. It used to be called a labor market opinion. So they used to give this opinion that said, this is a positive effect on the labor market or negative. And with an approval, or with this positive opinion, an employer could then go and hire a foreign worker. A foreign worker could then submit an application for a temporary work permit. Over the years, the government's made some changes to this program, and they essentially also changed the name of it. So it is a labor market impact assessment, and it's now a little bit more accurate to the labor market. So they're looking at labor market conditions. It's a much more in-depth application these days, and the department assesses the labor market conditions to determine whether or not, again, this position is going to have that positive, neutral, or negative effect on the labor market. With a positive effect, they will issue a labor market impact assessment approval, and then the foreign worker could then apply for a work permit. So this has been years. This has been for decades. But the way they run the program kind of changes with the times and with the economy and with what the labor market conditions look like, and in different provinces and in different cities.
Right. Right. And the program, so if I understand it correctly, the LMIA program is not canceled, but they've now adjusted it, or they've restricted it heavily. So if I'm an employer now, I have kind of new rules. If I'm a worker, I see a new world in front of me. But does it feel practically like a ban at this point? Like, is it starting to feel? Because, when you and I had our conversation, we were talking about some of the challenges of different businesses. And then right after we had the conversation, companies like Tim Hortons came out, and they're basically saying now, they're going to stop using the temporary foreign workers program. They're going to start hiring locally again. So talk to me a little bit about sort of, the challenges you're seeing on the ground. Is it practically a ban?
So it's not necessarily, a ban, but it kind of looks like one. and it almost feels like one. What they've done is September of 2024, they realized the unemployment rate is way too high in the country, across the nation. And what they did was they started cutting back. And what they're doing is they're, in order to achieve their goals, and we've had conversations about the government's immigration goals in last episodes with Phil Mooney and myself, where the government is trying to cut back on the number of foreign workers that are essentially coming in. So there's a lot of individuals today in Canada with work permits that are set to expire, about 1.3 million that are going to expire this year of 2026. What the government is trying to do is they're trying to avoid bringing in more foreign workers. Essentially, they're responding to labor market conditions. Whether it's the right way to do it or not, that's a different topic. But what they're doing is they're essentially cutting back. As of September of 2024, any employer in a region in the country that is experiencing 6% or more unemployment rate is in an area where there is what they call refusal to process policy in place. And what that means is you can't apply as an employer. You just can't. Not unless you're putting what's called a high wage application. So the government of Canada created a threshold. For example, in Ontario, it's, I believe, $36 an hour. Anything above 36 or above an hour allows you to submit an application. It's called a high wage application, and you can submit that for a chef, a cook, a truck driver, whatever. As long as it is a high wage application, you can apply. With low wage applications, you are capped at 10% of your workforce, which has been around for a little while now. It used to be 15, it used to be 20%, it went down to 15%, and now they're down to 10. And what they've done is they've also applied that 6% rule. So if you are in a region that has 6% or more unemployment rate, which is in fact nearly the entire country, there's very, very specific areas that in the country that are not 6%, they're a little bit less than that. And that those are the regions where you can apply for a low wage position. Now, there's a lot of employers in Canada that are struggling to find workers or retain workers. And remember that the 1.3 million work permits that are set to expire in 2026, those are individuals that are working in low wage positions, a lot in the food sector, a lot in the construction industry. Those individuals may or may not be able to renew work permits. Those employers may or may not be able to retain those workers. So what's going to happen is you're going to have almost like an exodus of all these individuals that are in Canada on work permits who are going to have to leave, or they can't stay in the country with work permits at least. So the government is responding to the labor market conditions. Again, whether or not that is the proper way to do it or the way that they're essentially blanketing low wage applications is it could be another topic for discussion, because what they're expecting is to bring down the temporary foreign worker or the temporary resident percentage to under 5% by 2027. So that means they're just not accepting applications. They're making it very, very difficult for employers to hire foreign workers, even in high wage applications. We're finding that employers in high wage applications that are paying $45 an hour to individuals that they need to retain, they can't. I've got clients that are stuck getting refusals on LMI applications that we're working very hard to convince ESDC of the need for these individuals. And ESDC says, no, we're refusing this, because they're just essentially looking, it's coming from the top. They're basically, the way we see it is that it's coming from the top. They're basically saying, try to find any reason to refuse employers, try to find any reason. And even if you had an LMI as an employer, a work permit is a separate application. We're seeing employers get approvals on LMIAs and then refusals on work permits. So
Ooh.
they're getting approved on LMIAs to bring in the foreign workers, and then IRCC, which is Immigration Refugees Canada, is the Department for Immigration, is actually refusing the work permits, and we're finding them providing unreasonable reasons for refusal that are not, that are not very reasonable. They'll find almost any reason we find today that they're refusing these work permits, and then employers are stuck. They're spending thousands of dollars getting LMIAs approved. Finally, you get the approval, and then work permits are getting denied. So they're just trying to
Wow.
avoid bringing in new foreign workers. That's from our perspective as immigration consultants, and we're talking about this quite a bit. We're feeling that, very much, and we're not only feeling it, we're really seeing it happen. And I've got employers that are closing doors. I've got pharmacy clients that are in Manitoba. They're closing doors because, and they've had closed one or two locations. This particular client, because they can't fill, they can't, and they're looking for a pharmacy assistant. So it's not even low wage positions, high wage positions, high skill positions. We're just These employers are having a difficult time today.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I understand you. And just if you get a high wage LMIA for the listeners, it doesn't mean you're on a pathway to a permanent residence. It just means you're able to work. If you get a work
Right.
permit, you're able to work in the country. So years ago,
Right.
quite frankly, if you did get an LMIA, you would get additional, let's call it points, right? Or credit, and therefore you would move faster towards a PR because you're, I guess, your worth, which in my mind made total sense. Like that seemed to make, you had identified someone who was essential to your business. You got them in, they came in, they worked out, they stayed. Quite frankly, as they worked, they could, work with you for a few years, get experience, benefit your business, Canada, buy a home, and then they would get a PR. Right.
Right.
But that
Yeah.
pathway is even more difficult now. There's no credit. The only thing you get from getting an LMIA right now is, quite frankly, the ability to potentially work, I guess, right?
Correct, correct. Yeah, they made those changes back, I believe, in March of 2025, March or April of 2025, where they removed the points for having a job offer. You used to get either 50 points or 200 points, depending on the level of the occupation, right? The high skill level,
Yeah.
and so they removed those points. So now candidates who came to Canada, perhaps as international students, got jobs, came on work permits, acquired Canadian work experience, and now employers wanting to retain those individuals are pushing for their support under some immigration program, and those points are now no longer awarded to those individuals who would have made them a priority in the pool, or have pushed their points up to the extent that they would get an invitation to become permanent residents. Because as we know, the immigration system in Canada primarily is a points driven system, almost like a glorified lottery. So the more points you have, the higher chances are for you to become a permanent resident or to receive an invitation to apply. And we're seeing that now. A lot of individuals who are in the pool are stuck in the pool for a while, because they're not getting those points. Now, the government said that they're making some changes. They made an announcement about a month ago, advising that the immigration system is going to kind of go and kind of have an overhaul, as they say. But we don't know to what extent. We don't know how. We know that the express entry system is likely going to change. Right now, we have three streams: the federal skilled worker, the Canadian experience class, and the federal skilled trades class. And those appear to soon go away. And then we'll have kind of one immigration stream that's going to funnel everyone through that particular pool. And how they're going to select candidates from that pool, how their points are going to be awarded, we don't really know. So we're kind of up in the air when it comes to what's going to happen in the next few months or in the next year.
But and I'm hoping they're listening, and I'm hoping we're getting through. To me, and my family came into the country, quite frankly, decades ago, and they came in at a time where either a family member had to sponsor you in the country, and they had to support you for so many months and take care of you, make sure you had a place to live. And I'm sure that system had its challenges too, but for the most part, that's kind of the way the process worked. In this case, if you're sponsored into the country by an employer, you have an active job, and you've secured yourself employment, I find it bizarre that you're not getting additional credit. I find and on top of that, if you have an education, or if you've went to even to school here or done something contribute to society, you've got an employer, you're paying taxes, you're paying rent, groceries, you're
Right.
hopefully buying a home. Those are the things that we should value. And I hope they're listening, because I think those are the things that should be getting points, right? And those are the things that should be
Correct.
elevating people. And not to do that is just a travesty. Like I don't really understand the rationale.
Well, this is coming from employers who, or candidates with employers who are using loopholes within the system. So
Mm.
there's a lot of bad apples out there. It's not one or two. There's quite a bit of employers who support candidates on on permanent residency, who would essentially get paid for it. Whether it's because they want to help a friend or they want to help a family member, and then you've got all these employers who are essentially get caught up in this act, and Canada is basically saying, look, we're not going to award points because we kind of want to punish those individuals who are doing this. We're not going to award points because it was an incentive for employers to give these job offers, even if the job offer wasn't genuine or wasn't valid. Because what happens is once an individual becomes a permanent resident, there is no recourse after that. The employer can let them go. The foreign worker can choose to go live in a different province, can choose to work in a different occupation. And so there wasn't really anything um, to monitor that. And because of these few bad apples, Canada is basically saying, "No, we're going to cancel this point system here. We're going to remove these points to avoid that incentive for individuals and for those employers who were essentially doing it with fraudulent intent." That's the real reason behind making those changes. Um, Again, whether or not that's the right way to do it or not, that's a different story. But that's the logic that the government had for doing this.
Yeah, yeah, no, and it's interesting. So I dug in before the show with the team, and thank you, Christoph and the team, for helping me on this, and Beacon and the rest of the guys. This went actually in front of the United Nations. I don't think how embarrassing people realize this is, and I wanted to bring it up on the show because we dug into it. At the United Nations, the special rapporteur, Mr. Obagata, it became a major turning point in a public debate. And he wrote a report on it. Says Canada's temporary foreign worker program is seen as a breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery, pointing to the closed work permits, debt bondage, wage theft, abuse, hazardous long hours, sexual harassment, and the power of imbalance created by employers depending on one employer. And it's interesting, this went in front of the House of Commons. So there was a committee report, and it talked about the temporary foreign constituted a breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery and highlighted all the same things. So this is something that our parliament has looked at, the United Nations has looked at. So I don't think, Canadians really realize how embarrassing the fact that we lost control of this process. Like, I really do. Like, and the sad part is now, I think there is a group inside of the government in immigration that did realize that. So they probably were getting flack at the time, and they were, from when I'm looking at it now, they started handing out these large fines, 161,000 to a residential building construction company, long haul trucking company fines of 150,000. So they started doing these $100,000, $200,000 fines around the time the United Nations was laying into them, saying, "Come on now, you're selling your temporary foreign worker, process to the world, and why are you doing that?" And instead of fixing it, we shut it down. We kind of said, "Okay, time out. We got to take a break." We shut it down, but it's penalized all those people who are sort of caught in the middle now because we lost control of it.
Yeah, this abuse of I don't know if you want to call it abuse of power that the employers exemplify, that's been around for a long time.
Mhm.
But there are measures in place. ESDC has measures in place to audit employers. They have measures in place to revoke LMIAs from employers. Whether there's going to be bad apples or not, that's going to be in in anything in life. We're going to always have these few, and I'm trying to avoid naming the employers in Canada who have had some of these bans and who are on the blacklist. There was a very large company in Canada, and we all know it, and they were found to be in violation of the temporary foreign worker program on many accounts. And
Mhm.
so now they're banned from applying for LMIAs. They're banned from hiring these foreign workers. Uh, Are there bad apples? Yes. Are there employers that are, you know, abusing employees? Perhaps there are. I've had calls from individuals who have felt like they were being abused or had some sort of reaction to their to their employer's behavior. And so Canada does have a process where an employee can leave and request a work permit that is open for purposes like abuse and assault and stuff like that. Um, but the government of Canada, ESDC is trying their best to do what is necessary to combat this. Uh, but again, this, this is, this is years ago. Also, with the live-in caregiver program, we had employers that were hiring live-in caregivers, that we had agencies that were hiring live-in caregivers under the live-in caregiver program, which now no longer exists. And back in, I think it was 2008, when this went to the parliament, they came out with Bill C-50 or whatever it was, and they prevented employers from they made it much more difficult for employers to hire live-in caregivers. They implemented special rules. You couldn't request a live-in caregiver to live in your home. So they because there was a lot of abuse with that program. They would bring in foreign workers living in basements, farming them out to doing odd jobs, holding their passports. There's a few bad apples in that game for sure. But again, the United Nations is going to look at this and is going to pinpoint, how bad this program is. It's not horrible. There are a few more than a few bad apples, but if we look at the grand scheme of the program, if we look at employers, and I talk to employers every day, legitimate, genuine employers that are having a very difficult time finding electricians, finding food service supervisors, finding cooks, truck drivers, licensed practical nurses, hospital workers, construction positions, childcare. There's a lot of occupations in Canada that are legitimately in a shortage, and so there's that fine line between canceling the entire program or making it so super difficult for employers, but rather, coming up with a strategy that's going to allow employers to still use the system, and then obviously penalize those bad apples. The United Nations putting it out there that, we're using the foreign worker program and we're creating slaves and bringing in foreign. It's not necessarily true, because if you look at the requirements of an employer and when they have to submit an LMIA, what their requirements are, they're very stringent. You have to offer prevailing wages. The government sets that prevailing wage. So the government sets what a prevailing wage is for a food service supervisor or a cook in, rural Manitoba, or in Winnipeg, Manitoba, or in Vancouver, British Columbia, or in Toronto. That same position can have a prevailing wage that is different across the country. And Canada's ESDC, and they use statistics for this, they come up with a prevailing wage. The employer has to offer that wage, if that or higher. A penny less will be an automatic administrative refusal. Moreover, they have to prove that they've advertised the position and given opportunities to Canadians. They go through a stringent process for that. Over the years, ESDC, which controls the Canadian Job Bank, which is jobbank.gc.ca, has made that website even more complex. There's tracking systems in place for employers to for ESDC officers to verify whether employers invited Canadians, given opportunities for Canadians to attend interviews, increased wages, have plans in place for transitioning from foreign worker program to permanent residency. There's a lot of measures in place that are now making it even more difficult for employers. So it's not to say that this program, just needs to be shut down. They just need to improve on the way they do things, and they're improving them. They're making it harder, and again, maybe too difficult in certain instances. Um, but I'm in favor of the path that they're taking. I just think that sometimes they need to listen to employers more than than just government committees that are sitting in offices in Ottawa, because the government committees, they're not necessarily on the ground. They don't realize what's happening on the ground. I think it was in April 1st of 2026, the ESDC came out with a policy that said, if you're in a rural area in Canada, there are certain provisions which allow you to apply for an LMIA beyond the 10% cap that you have. So it allows you to apply even even if you're in a 6% or more unemployment rate. So they are looking at specific regions. They're looking at very specific rural areas where it's very difficult for employers to retain these workers, and they're giving them certain measures to apply. Whether it solves the issue for that employer, not always, but they are. What I think they're trying to do is really come forward with policies that are going to try to help, even though majority of the country still can't apply.
Right, right. No, I agree. And thanks, Nir. I appreciate it. I wanted to hit on a point you made, which is something, this is my belief, or this Paul's opinion, let's call it. The challenge they're having right now is they don't know how many people are willing to work in this country. And that, it sounds weird when I say it, but quite frankly, when you take a look at the published unemployment numbers, or EI employment numbers, and then you take a look at disability, and you take a look at the people on like welfare or social assistance or benefits in Canada, they don't have a firm handle on it right now. So, you take out children under the age of, let's say, 18, you take out seniors over 65, you take out social benefits, you take out EI, you take all those out. They don't have a firm grip on actually who's in that workforce. So I think where they're struggling right now, and this is a census statistics issue, they don't really know. And so I think they're trying to, take a swag at it because they're struggling with the numbers. We're about to do a show, so we were actually prepping for it last week, and we're trying to get a handle across each of the provinces what those numbers are. It's very hard to pull those numbers out. So, the number of Canadians that are on some social benefit program, there's so many of them. It takes forever each province just to go through the exact numbers. And the numbers are high, especially in Ontario. So as an employer, I'm going somewhere with this, as an employer, you're fearful, quite frankly, because what I don't think the government realizes, when you put that ad out, no one comes. So if you didn't get a temporary foreign worker kind of coming into your front door, there's no one showing up like who's a Canadian citizen right now, because quite frankly, I don't think they have a handle on those numbers. So the number of people, forget, I talk to friends at dinner parties who own businesses all the time. You go to some of the major online posting for job recruitment, social sites, zero in Canada people show up. It's almost like pre-COVID again, where you put that ad out, and then quite frankly, the people that show up half the time have made up their CV from AI, and they're not even real. So they're walking through your front door with this made up resume. If they do show up, when you do back check it, they're not even close because they actually got it from AI. And you only get 3 people. So 17 people may say they're coming, 3 people show up. So we're going kind of back to where we were pre-COVID again. And I just don't think, and I know the Tim Hortons announcement the other day, which I was listening to on the news and I was reading about, they're saying they have 110,000 team members 4,000 of them were hired under the temporary foreign workers program. I don't know, that they're saying that, so they must know their numbers. That sounds really low, quite frankly. So maybe it's true. I don't know, but it sounds low. 3.6% is the percentage. Again, sounds low. They want to hire 10,000 new local team members. I guess maybe, if they're just looking for summer students or students, they might have a shot at it. But quite frankly, you don't even get a lot of students coming through the door when you go to hire people. So I really do think, that's going to be the next thing, the next crazy sort of down trough we're going to see. We're going to enlist this program, and then you're going to see these. Remember pre-COVID when we used to hear these stories about coffee shops closing at 4 p.m.
Absolutely.
Where I owned it, I was a franchisee, and all of a sudden, and the funny thing is, American chains are talking about coming here. I think Dunkin' Donuts is talking about coming here and opening up, thousands of stores, and I'm like, holy cow! Like, have you really looked at the climate? And good for you, good on you, but you better have a human resource program or a plan in place to figure that out. And so I do struggle with all those. You mentioned and the programs, and we get, before we leave it, I just want to go back for people at home. When we're talking about fraudulent LMIA schemes, we're talking about people, selling them back home for, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So
Right.
people think they're buying an LMIA. We're talking about people coming here and paying the employer, not the employer paying them when they get here. The crazy things, that the stories that we heard over the last few years, it's unbelievable. And it became so, how do I say it? It sounded like a tale. It sounded like, one of those locker room tales that you're telling, after a game, when you're sitting around having a beer. That's the way it started. And then you started to hear it more and more about these people. And then, quite frankly, the temporary foreign workers that you were running into started telling it. So, it became kind of that urban tale that became the truth. And then we found out, holy cow, we're doing it. And the challenge was, people who actually arrived under the same program started doing it. That was the silly thing. Like, they started to game the system. When they got through the system, they started to game the system. And that's the shame. And it's almost near, I almost thought to myself at times, wouldn't it be nice if they went in and actually found people who were in the system, who had a legal background, brought them in, got them involved, recruited them, and had them work on their behalf to root this out, because they knew more about it than probably the government workers who weren't going through the system. There could have been a way, I think we could have done this fairly simply, because I think there's some, when you meet people that are new to Canada now, number one, highly educated in the countries they come from, very smart. Like, when you talk to them, they're very astute. They're very on the ball. They communicate because culturally they come from very social communities, so they talk amongst their community. It's very social, and not like a typical Canadian society right now. Community. So it's very social, and quite frankly, they would be the first ones that would probably have rooted it out if we would have given them a chance to just get it out of the system. So I'm sure they would have got the gamers out of the system fast. We didn't do that, and shame on us for not doing it. Hey, I want to talk to you and building a stronger LMIA system. So I just wanted to go through that to make sure we got it down. Definitely the higher wage. I think that is, quite frankly, done something to root out the low wage because the system was in such bad shape. Is there things we can do that would, let's talk about it, fix this new system quickly? Are there things we could do that would kind of get us back on track and a little more? Because I know, again, for those people I'm having dinner and the entrepreneurs that are in my social circle, they're petrified about what's coming. They really are. Like, it's if I go to a dinner party this Saturday and we're sitting around, there'll be two people at that table. We'll be talking about their staffing issues. So, like, whatever we call this new system, an LMIA plus or whatever, is how do we make it like better?
Well, I think what has to happen, for me, I would think that if they have more enforcement, you know, I don't know if you want to call it boots on the ground, and actually enforce certain labor conditions that they approve. Because what they do today is if they want to audit an employer, they send an email or they send a fax, whatever, and the email says, we're evaluating or auditing you for the past 3 months because you've had X number of foreign workers. We're auditing these 2 3 foreign workers. We want to see how much you're paying, what are their employment conditions, where are they working, what are they doing, etc. And it's all paper based, so employers have to submit proof, pay stubs, evidence of an individual working somewhere, in what position, et cetera. And it's all done on paper. It's administrative. Um, it's very rare if you find an ESDC officer or CBSA going to an employer and actually enforcing or verifying. And I think if you had more enforcement, whereas you would have boots on the ground, essentially, you would have employers in a little bit more fear. And I'm not saying that fear is what we need, but I think that if we had more enforcement, proper enforcement, um, and perhaps better oversight, you would have a better program because you would still allow employers who need genuine workers and who have a need to fill positions genuinely, um, still benefit from this program, because we've got a lot of like you were touching on the employment rate, right? So I had a couple of numbers that I put aside. The youth unemployment rate, ages 15 to 24, is about 14+% this April. Um, the unemployment rate for skilled professionals is below the national average, below 6%. We're talking about 2.9%. Things like business, finance, administration, natural and applied sciences were around 2.8%. Management occupations are even at 1.3% unemployment. So there is a genuine need to fill those positions, but you've got a skewed percentage, as you were mentioning, which we don't really know what the real rate is. And these officers or these administrative professionals in government committees are putting a blanket in place that says, no, you can't apply, instead of looking at genuine need and then penalizing those individuals or those, sorry, companies or employers and organizations that are doing this for whatever other sake that they have. And yeah, there's a lot of there's immigration consultants who have become immigration consultants on the mere reason of finding vulnerable individuals and having good friends in Canada who they would say 50,000, 60,000 for a job offer. They would come to Canada on work permits that never really amount to anything. They're in Canada on work permits, but they don't actually work for the company, or they get fake pay stubs or they get fraudulent documentation, and then they support their application for permanent residency. So yeah, that's where those things occur. But the oversight on the element, I mean, I'll give you an example. ESDC, about a year, maybe 2 years ago, I think it was a year ago, implemented, I think it was as of September of 2024, so 2 years ago, implemented a rule or a informal policy that says, when you're an employer applying for an LMIA, part of the documentation you need to submit to show that you're a legitimate, genuine employer is tax returns, financials that prove that you could afford the hiring of this foreign worker, or foreign workers. What they did was they made it more difficult for those employers. Instead of now saying, we'll accept a tax return, or we'll accept, your T2, T2 200 and T2, 225, whatever, 125. They now want an attestation, which used to be allowed to be provided, was allowed to be provided by a lawyer or an accountant. Now there's no more attestation by a lawyer or an accountant. You have to go to your bank where you bank with your business account, and you have to have the bank manager agree to give you an attestation that says this company is good financial standing and can afford paying the foreign worker, and we guarantee that, right? So the bank has to give a letter that says they guarantee that that the information they're giving is true, that the employer is able to afford covering the fees or the extra salaries that are needed for this foreign worker. ESDC made it so difficult. I would say 9 out of 10 of my clients who are legitimate employers can't get those attestations. So that puts them in a position where it's an automatic refusal. If you can't prove based on the minimum documents that the government is saying they need, right? Because a lot of companies we know, when they file taxes, they show a loss. They show a loss because they want to pay less taxes, but they show a loss. And when they show a loss, that's indicative of you're not making enough money. How can you add another salary on this? How can you add another $40 an hour? How can you add 5 more foreign workers? So they have to go to their banks. What they used to be able to go to their lawyers or accountants to get an attestation that says we're in good financial standing. We can support the hiring of an additional foreign worker. Now they have to go to their banks. A lot of banks are refusing this. 9 out of 10 banks
Mm.
are refusing this. So we're getting a lot of refusals for those reasons because employers can't show that they can support the hiring of foreign workers. So ESDC is making it so difficult today that even from an administrative procedure, even if there are a genuine employer, there is a genuine need. They're good employers. They've hired before. They've got approvals in the past. They prove that they are genuine and they meet the obligations that they are required to meet on previous files or LMIAs. Now are struggling to retain the same workers that they already have on LMIAs because of these type of policies. So it's enforcement would do better, but there's also ways to enforce. And I think that if they enforce them with more oversight, actually on the ground, going into businesses and verifying versus just administratively, I think that's going to solve a lot of problems. It'll cost a little bit more. Look, employers in the past, when I started this 20 years ago, there was no fee to apply for an LMIA. You submitted a 2-page application and there was no fee. It went
Right.
from 0 fee to 200, I think, in $75 or 250. I think it was 275, and now it's $1,000 per position. I've got a client in Manitoba, an A&W franchise that has been hiring foreign workers because they're in a rural area and they have no way to retain these workers. So they use the temporary foreign worker program, and they have hired, I don't know, tens of foreign workers in the past. Now they're struggling to retain them. The LMIAs are not being approved. And if they are being approved, then foreign workers are not being approved under the work permits. So, instead of it, doing it where it's a policy that applies to everyone, you have to look at actual employers and perhaps assess them individually and see what their complications are and why they're appealing to this program. They made it harder now. So now instead of 4 weeks of advertising, you have to do 8 weeks of advertising. So it's a longer process. But is that really the best oversight for this? I don't think so. I don't think that's going to take out the bad apples. I don't think it's going to take out those that are abusing foreign workers. But it just makes it harder for genuine employers.
Um, how about the standard? It's interesting, and we've never talked about it before, and I'll throw this on the table. How about the standards for immigration consultants? I know years ago, when I met Phil, and then, I met you after, quite frankly, there was quite a rigorous, there was always discussion about a whole, association joining. What is that ever picked up any speed, had any legs?
Well, the college, there's been a lot of, and this is you can do a whole show on this. There's been a lot of
Right.
fraud with the original College of Immigration Consultants in the past. That's when I started back in '06, '07. Ever since then, and we've had numerous regulatory bodies now, and now we are in statute, and immigration consultants are held to the same sort of standard as lawyers and doctors and nurses in the country. Um, there is still a jurisdictional issue with immigration consultants working abroad and doing things they shouldn't be doing. CICC, which is the college, still has a hard time going after bad consultants outside. Those that are inside, yeah, they penalize them, they strip them from their license. There's investigations, there's criminal charges that can be laid, penalties, fines, jail time. So there's a lot of immigration consultants who are now, not doing what some of the stuff that they were doing in the past. There's been a number of individuals that have been stripped from their license, and I know a few of them because of the work that they were doing. But the oversight on immigration. When I started, there were a lot of immigration programs out there. You needed to take a 6-month course. You pass and you pass the test, and you become a consultant. Now, I think it's a 2-year diploma program at only a couple of universities or colleges, and you have to go through those programs, and the test is a little bit more rigorous. And now they even make it harder for immigration consultants. You need an additional level of a license to be able to represent foreign nationals on the immigration appeal division and in front of the refugee board. So those are things that they've made a little bit more tougher. There's a lot more immigration consultants in Canada today than there were when I started. I think when I started, there were a couple thousand, and we became some of us even got grandfathered, not me, but some of them got grandfathered into becoming consultants that are licensed. I had to take a test at the time in 2007. And then after that, we've seen a rise in immigration consulting because people thought it was just that easy, right? They have connections abroad. They become consultants. They charge students thousands of dollars. They find employers who are willing to put in fake LMOs or LMIAs now and pay them tens of thousands of dollars. And so they would make a lot of money that way. But now with the immigration system being the way it is, we're seeing a lot of immigration consultants actually leaving the industry because it's just not that simple anymore. You can't just make money the way you used to make money, and you can't, charge students $10,000 to help them on, find a school. They could do it online today with Apply Board. There's a lot of different measures in place that are now put in, and the system and Chat GPT and the AI and everything, and all these individuals can do things on their own that in the past they needed somebody like an immigration consultant or immigration lawyer. So, and yeah, and just because there's bad apples in immigration consultant doesn't mean there's no bad apples in immigration lawyers. There's
Yeah.
sometimes we're finding things in the news that we would never imagine, and it's because of an immigration lawyer, or so the profession has changed over the years. It's become a little bit more difficult to become an immigration consultant, but then also the business itself is much more difficult today. So
Right,
we're
right.
seeing
It-
a lot less becoming immigration consultants, and then of course those that are already in the business, some of them are actually leaving.
Right, right. Hey, Neer, is there any way to check out? So you're going to go to work with an immigration consultant. Is there any way to check out their standing?
Yes, on the College of Immigration. So CICC is the abbreviation. It's, I believe the website is college, IC-college or college test. Let me see. Let me just confirm. Yes, it's college-ic.ca. So college immigration
Yep.
consultants.ca. You can go on that website. You can verify an immigration consultant. Obviously, if you're in a province and you're hiring an immigration lawyer, you can go to that province, the law society for that province, and verify an individual, whether it's by name, by license number. An immigration consultant and an immigration lawyer must always, present their license number or their ID, and you can verify that very easily. You can go on Google and type in their name and look up location, look up an office, look up a phone number, do your due diligence before you decide who you're going to hire, and make sure that you're hiring the individual that has experience in the case that if you're an employer, look for someone that knows how to deal with LMIAs, understands the system. If you're a foreign worker and you're looking to stay in Canada, finds an immigration consultant that has experience with permanent residency programs and perhaps even provincial nominee programs in your province. But yes, verifying an immigration is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. No, good advice. Good advice. Near just before we leave, and this was an interesting conversation we had, like I said, a few weeks ago. I'm in the system right now. I'm on a pathway. I feel like my pathway is disappearing. I'm in Canada right now. Your advice, the other day when I talked to you about this, you said people just got to hang on and wait to see what's going to happen with the changes coming, right? So,
Yeah.
I know in life, and I tell younger people when I meet them, when I go around, some day, there's cloudy days in life, rainy days. You just got to wait it out now, see what's going to happen. Hopefully, there's some sanity coming around the corner. This all gets level set, and the people who have the skill sets and are needed and want to work hard, get through the program. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that there's like we said, there's about 1.3 million temporary foreign workers or temporary residents, whether those are students or workers or visitors in Canada. That are looking, obviously, a lot of them are looking to stay permanently. The programs right now are probably going to change in the next, I would say, 3 months to 12 months from now. They're probably going to change. I've got a lot of calls from individuals who've got 2 years left on their work permit or a year and a half left on their work permit, and they're stressing because they want to find a path. My answer to that is just hang tight. If you're not qualified yet or you don't have enough points, wait it out. Let's see what happens. Some of the changes may benefit those individuals. Obviously, they may not, but waiting is probably a better idea. And if you're eligible to apply for express entry or any provincial nominee programs, submit an application, hire somebody that understands the system, and then do it with them so that they can assist you the best way, so you have the best chances. But there are these changes that we believe that are going to happen, and sometimes it's better to just wait it out and see what happens and not stress over what's going to happen in a year and a half when my work permit's going to expire, because labor market conditions can change. The LMIA system it's always vulnerable for change. It fluctuates. They change things on the fly. What information I gave you today could be irrelevant in a week from now when they post an update. So, these are things that are fluid. The immigration system in Canada is fluid, and it also changes based on who you have as a prime minister, or who you have as an immigration minister. So you have to kind of sometimes just kind of hang tight. But the best advice I could give anybody today is make sure that if you are talking and getting advice, better to not look at ChatGPT or Claude or Google Gemini or whatever. That speak to a professional, speak to a representative, and make sure that that individual is genuine in the information that they're giving you, because we're finding a lot of immigration consultants and a lot of even immigration lawyers today, what they're doing is they're telling somebody to apply for, humanitarian, compassionate considerations. I had a client who called me the other day and said, we submitted our H&C application because we just don't see a path to PR, and we found out that H&C is an option. Well, sure, it might be an option, but the percentage of approval for those are so small. It's such a minute number that the likelihood of somebody getting an H&C or humanitarian compassionate approval for permanent residence, because there's no other path for you to become a permanent resident, is so small. And processing times today on an H&C application is about 10 years, and it doesn't give you status in Canada. So by
Wow.
filing it, it doesn't mean that you can stay. You still have to maintain temporary stay. And a lot of people are not getting that information, right? They're being told, file an H&C, you'll have a chance, pay us $5,000-$10,000 to do it for you. And that's the information that we're actually telling clients, don't do that. That's a last resort that most likely won't work. And there has to be really good, compelling reasons for an agency or refugee claims. There's a bill now that we talked about on a previous show where if you're claiming refugee protection, you're going to be potentially interviewed at you have your hearing within 6 months. You're not even eligible to file a refugee claim if you've been here for so long as of a certain date. So
Right.
just just filing because somebody told you to do that, probably not the greatest idea. And it could actually make it worse for you if you are looking to do things by the book, right? Or if you're doing things legally. It could hurt your chances of becoming a permanent resident. If things change and now you're eligible, you may not be in the future, or there could be admissibility issues.
Good advice, Near. And you know what? It sounds like, as I used to tell my kids on the roller coaster ride, hold on tight. So those of you out there on the pathway, you got to hold on. Near, thank you again. As always, I learned so much from these shows. We're going to tie back with you after, and then when the next set of rules come out, get you and Phil on a show. And much appreciated. And for those of you listening, stay tuned. We're going to have more on immigration as this pathway unfolds.